Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar about how you can navigate Brexit and win new deals, whatever happens in the months to come. My name is William Barnes-Graham, and I'm a Senior Content Editor at the Institute of Export and International Trade. Next, please. Just a bit of housekeeping before we kick off. We will be running a live Q&A later in the session, and you can ask questions at any point using the question box on the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen. The general principle here is that we'll only ask questions that are relevant to the broader audience, so we won't go into company specifics as such, but if you do have specific questions, we can refer you to the Institute of Export's technical helpline afterwards. We can also share slides with you upon request. If you like these, please just email us at admin@opentoexport.com and we can send them over to you in PDF. Next, please. The Institute of Export and International Trade is the UK's professional membership body for traders, endorsed by the World Trade Organization and the International Chamber of Commerce as a small business champion. We offer a unique range of individual and business membership benefits, education and training catering for beginners through to master's degrees, and an always exciting and prestigious program of events celebrating UK businesses' exporting achievements. Next, please. The International Communications Advisor Network Limited, or ICANN Global, who we are collaborating with today, is a not-for-profit company limited by guarantees overarching aims to help UK companies to increase their business competitiveness in international markets. Services are accessible to all UK companies regardless of size and location. ICANN Global offers a unique combination of digital, language and cultural support to exporters to help them to increase sales and overall business performance. ICANN Global also offers consultancy, training and coaching programs across the UK through 5 highly specialised director advisors and practitioners. Services include the flagship International Communications Review, which is an easy way to benchmark where you are at and what you need to do to grow your business internationally. Next, please. From ICANN Global, we have Norma Foster and Claire Snowden. Norma and Claire each have over 30 years of international business experience and both now specialise in international business development and communications. Norma has enjoyed an international career ranging from project and operations management to strategic management and business development in UK and international markets. Claire has a proven track record of business growth in textiles and apparel manufacturing, globally living and working in Europe, the Middle East and the Far East. If you'd like to know more about them, they invite you to connect with them on LinkedIn. And finally, Kevin Shakespeare is a key member of the Institute of Export and International Trade's membership team with a strong knowledge of education, trade and finance and international trade, built up over many years in many senior management positions. And Kevin is also a webinar regular on the Open to Export project and one of our main Brexit kind of trainers. So to kick things off, over to you, Kevin.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to present on this webinar today. I'm conscious some of you may have heard me before on Brexit webinars, but if so, again, it's a pleasure to speak again. Next slide, please. So on this webinar, what we're going to do is do a reflection of a series of events that the Institute co-hosted with our partners ICANN Global to do with Brexit readiness. The events took place in Cambridge, Plymouth, Newcastle and London, and London was the last event yesterday. But we're keen that what we covered in the events, including workbooks, are available to as wide an audience as possible. So you'll notice you have the opportunity here to download the project workbooks which the Institute and ICANN Global provided as part of the events. We were also producing, following the events, further guidance, further information from a Brexit perspective, and we shall make sure that's available to everybody as well. But in the context of some of the key messages discussed, we talked around the need to communicate with customers and suppliers on the basis that communication is good and a shared understanding of Brexit impacts is important. We very much wanted participants and obviously yourselves on the webinar today to be clear on what the potential Brexit impacts are for your business, but not just impacts, opportunities as well. So possibly by looking at the implementing solutions, further opportunities to gain more business with Europe itself, the European Union and the rest of the world. And finally, to identify who the key stakeholders are which can support your business moving forward. So again, for example, for trading goods, the likes of freight forwarders and courier companies. Next slide, please. What I'd like to do in terms of introducing this is really just do a quick summary in terms of what could happen. Now, a lot of the events activity started off to be focused on no deal and then taking that to new deals and opportunities. During the process, obviously, we had announcements with regard to the European Union agreeing to extend the period of leaving, so from the end of October to the end of January. And that's very much a flex extension. So if the UK gave notice and Parliament approved, the UK could leave the European Union before the 31st of January. But also potential impacts if the UK leaves with a deal. So the UK would enter a transition period, but in many respects at the end of a transition period, for example, the 31st of December 2020, a lot of the Brexit impacts will apply at that stage. So it's not always a case of this not happening or being, it's more a case of potentially being delayed, and it could happen. Clearly, during that transition period, some of the key Brexit issues, such as impact of tariffs, could be resolved for a comprehensive free trade agreement, and that may also cover trading services as well as trading goods. But there will still be some Brexit impacts, whether that's from customs, whether that's from regulatory compliance. And equally, even if the UK leaves with a deal, there are potential immediate impacts in terms of regulatory compliance, which may arise. So again, in some cases, it's not a case of the issue being arising later. It's a case of the issue arising immediately. So that, for example, could be issues around origin of goods. It could be issues around the CE mark, the new UK CA marking. So there could be more immediate issues there. And clearly there is trade with Northern and Southern Ireland to be considered as well in the event of a deal. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at tariffs, taxation and customs. So very much around the concept of trading in goods. We will look at services shortly. Next slide, please. So the basic principle is that tariffs are a barrier to trade. And currently there are no such barriers for trading in the European Union. Goods move in free circulation, so there are no customs barriers and no tariff barriers. Outside of being in a trading bloc like the European Union, it's also possible to reduce and eliminate tariffs through free trade agreements. And the EU has free trade agreements with over 70 countries in the world. And the UK has been working to try and continue these trade agreements, so through continuity agreements. To date, around 17 agreements have been rolled over. You have the web link on the slide there, which indicates the countries where trade agreements have been continued, and also the status of discussions. Now, if anyone has any particular questions about any countries where they want to check specifically on trade agreements not agreed, so examples potentially could be Japan, Turkey and Algeria, we're happy to take those questions. And also you'll see on the slide in the bottom left examples of tariffs that could apply. And these are just examples. It is fair to say that generally the highest tariff goods tend to be agricultural goods, and especially goods of animal origin, which can include eggs, milk, cheese and butter. But whereas engineering manufacturing could be around 5 to 10 to 12%. Next slide, please. So we've looked at the potential that tariffs could have. What we've been encouraging during the workshops and events is for companies to consider it specifically to their business. So in the workbooks available to you, you'll see links. You'll see the links here that are on these slides to the World Trade Organization in terms of determining what the tariff could be for your product. And you'll see links to Europa EU on the bottom left, which indicates where EU trade agreements currently exist, and a link in the bottom right to the UK government site with trade agreements that have been signed. Now, we will be following up on this in the feedback and providing further information for businesses that attended the events, and we'll be making that available for yourselves as well. But do look at the workbooks. They are key, and they provide a process and a journey for companies to go through. But it's important for companies to indicate their sales. Also include your UK sales there, because you may be selling to the UK, but it's possible that those goods may be ending up further in Europe or the rest of the world. Could that have an impact on those sales? Could that provide opportunities for you to increase your UK sales? So go through that and determine the impacts by country. Next slide, please. We've looked at exports, so now let's look at imports. In the event of a no-deal Brexit, the UK has announced a temporary import tariff, 12 months. But the interesting thing is, if the UK does leave the EU, even with a deal at the end of a transition period, it will revert to be able to set its own tariffs. So there could be some, if you like, clue or guidance here in these temporary tariffs as to what could apply going forward. And the basic principle of these tariffs is that tariffs on goods entering the UK have been eliminated for 88% of imported goods. And this elimination applies for goods from all 164 members of the WTO. So there is possibility if, for example, you're importing from China, from the United States, from the Middle East, that goods will currently you're having to pay tariffs on the imports will cease or removed. So tariffs are generally remaining only on agricultural goods and finished goods, for example, finished cars, finished clothing. Goods which are component parts, raw materials, or production processes effectively are zero tariffed. The UK is also introducing transitional procedures for importers, which will help importers. And again, the workbooks refer to that in the context of being able to defer duty if duty is payable on the 12% of products, and a reduction in the inspection of goods only taking place in the event of border force-led intelligence. So potentially good impacts there for UK importers and continue to be involved in supply chains. Next slide, please. So VAT, the treatment of VAT. So if anyone is already exporting outside the European Union, you will be aware that you zero rate your exports for VAT, but you must retain a full proof of export, a full export order file, which includes the customs declaration. If the UK leaves the European Union, then the same principles will apply on VAT. You will have to zero rate your exports to the EU for VAT, but you must have a full proof of export file for the purposes of customs and for the purposes of insurance of goods as well. But your European buyer will have to pay the VAT as soon as the goods land in the European Union. So again, that's something to consider, the impacts of that. Can the European buyer defer the payment of the VAT in any way? Now, for goods coming into the UK, the opposite applies. VAT would have to be paid by the UK importer on the goods landing in the UK. They can be offset against your VAT return as they do currently, but they would have to be paid immediately. So that could have had a cash flow impact on businesses, unless you had a bank duty deferment guarantee, or you use simplified import VAT accounting, SEVA, which only applies to companies with a 3-year track record in terms of importing and VAT. But the UK government has announced postponed VAT accounting will apply, which allows UK importers to offset the VAT in the same way as you do currently. Next slide, please. Now, this slide, again, in the events we talked about this, and in the workbooks we refer to it, is a key slide. It indicates an export from Corby in Northamptonshire to ultimately a buyer in Essen in Germany. But currently the goods move in free circulation, frictionless trade there are no customs barriers or paperwork as it's referred to. In the event of a no-deal Brexit, or in the event of a deal and the UK leaving the customs union at the end of a transition period, customs declarations will be required for goods leaving the UK and for goods entering the European Union. Now, again, if companies and businesses on this webinar already export outside the European Union, they'll be familiar with these processes. But if you haven't, these will be new processes for you. So companies must consider who is going to make the customs declaration, any import tariffs applicable, and what paperwork is required. And by paperwork, we mean a more detailed commercial invoice, the completion of the customs declaration, and a full proof of export order file. Again, we are welcome to take questions from you in terms of what represents a proof of export file, and we're happy to provide further information in that respect. Next slide, please. So having talked about who is responsible for the declaration, we've indicated there are two declarations, one declaration for the goods leaving the UK and one declaration for the goods entering the European Union. And if you're importing, it's the same principle. There will be a declaration for the goods leaving the European Union and a declaration for the goods entering the United Kingdom. And how we determine who makes those declarations is really down to the Incoterms, the international commercial terms. Again, this is an area we covered in some detail at the events. And you can see the slide on screen here, which very much refers to the different types of Incoterms. Now, these are based on Incoterms 2010. There is a new set of Incoterms 2020, which obviously will come into force next year. But if you have an example of, say, X works, where a lorry picks the goods up from your premises, and the responsibility for loading as well is down to the overseas buyer, then the declaration, both declarations have to be made by the European buyer. Are they aware of that fact? Because clearly there are impacts in terms of they will require a UK EORI number and they will require a UK VAT number. Will they be happy with that? Do they know that? And then at the other extreme, you have DDP, delivered duty paid, where it will be down to yourselves as the exporter to make both customs declarations and also pay any import tariffs in the European Union. Are you aware of the implications of that, and who is going to make that declaration for you? We'll talk about that on the next slide shortly. So some key impacts to consider that, because if you make the declaration, you will require an EU EORI number and you will require an EU VAT number, both of which you can obtain from one customs authority in the European Union, and which would cover all declarations in the EU. So the options you have is to try and use a freight forwarder or an agent to make the declaration on the behalf. There's obviously a cost, or you can do it yourself, in which you would purchase software which would interface with the customs system, but you would also need to train your staff. But irrespective of who makes the declaration, you are responsible in the eyes of customs. You are responsible also for getting the information to the forwarder or agent if you're making the declaration. So there are a lot of new procedures there, and customs training grants are available, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, in terms of training courses or specific what we call in-house company courses, but they are only available from eligible providers. And you would make an application to PwC, who manage the process. Next slide, please. So if we look at the next slide, we're now going to look in terms of processes. So I'll just talk through this. So in terms of trade-in services, so we've covered a bit around trading goods. So if we move to the next slide, we'll now look at trade-in services, as well as regulations and standards. So next slide, please. So first of all, regulations and standards. Now, a lot of these involve trading goods, but they could also involve trade-in services. So if you're using the CE marking, if you have chemicals for REACH, if you have goods of dual use, medical devices, food labeling, products of animal origin, there are all impacts there in terms of Brexit. Again, please raise questions if you have products and goods of those natures, and we can talk through when again we provide the update, we will also provide further details about the implications on these goods. So regulations and standards will change. They may change, or they'll clearly change in the event of a no deal. The timing around deal and when they change is still to be determined. But the UK has done a lot of work on UK CE marking, medical devices, labelling, and clearly that to some extent is ready to go. Next slide, please. So origin of goods. One factor we talked about is what is the origin nationality of your goods. So the main point to consider here is if you have complex supply chains, how does this impact your business? If you're receiving goods from Europe, sending them back in and out, what are the implications there? There could be implications in terms of you needing to meet origin requirements, and origin is required for nationality to declare the goods of UK nationality moving forward, but also for preferential origin in terms of goods being received free of tariffs when they enter a foreign country, for example, South Korea, Japan, Canada, as examples. If we have a next slide, please. So GDPR and data flows. So just want to talk through the impact of GDPR and data flows. The key impact here is do look at the Information Commissionaire's Office site for information on standard contractual clauses. So there is a need there to make sure that if you hold data on customers, personal data, EU nationals, employees, even if you book a hotel for a business, you are holding personal data. So do look at the Information Commissionaire's Office in terms of the process. Your standard contractual clauses must be in accordance with the guidance. So do look at that. Next slide, please. Trade-in services. So I would stress some of what we've discussed so far, whether it's on GDPR data flows, will affect companies trading in services as well. Specifically on trade-in services, and some of these will affect trading goods. Trademarks, there will be an automatic cloning of 1.7 million EU trademarks into an additional UK trademark. VAT in services. The place of supply rule continues to apply. So if you're providing services, for example, to a VAT registered business in Spain, the place of supply is Spain. That continues in the event of no deal Brexit. That doesn't change. The EC sales list would no longer be required. We'll look at business travel shortly, and we looked during the events at specific impacts on audiovisual services, selling software and fintech as well. Again, if you have specific questions on those sectors, there are specific Brexit impacts which we looked at during the events, and again we'll try to summarize in the information we provide. But if you're in those sectors, do raise specific questions. Next slide, please. So if you are selling services, what you should do is look at the government website in terms of the type of service you're providing. The web link is on the left-hand side. And then the ability to supply the services is on the right-hand side by EU country. There may be some additional barriers to services because the UK would be a third country outside the European Union. Professional qualifications may not also be automatically recognized depending on the country. Next slide, please. So what we're going to look at as we move towards a final slide is around travel. So in terms of travel, business travel, if we have a next slide, please, thank you. The impacts, first of all, in terms of EU nationals, is encourage your EU nationals to apply to the EU settlement scheme. That can be very, very important to actually do that. And since the launch of the EU settlement scheme, 1.5 million EU nationals have been granted settlement status in the UK. So do look at that and encourage your EU nationals who are very important to your business to apply to the EU settlement scheme. Next slide, please. So I guess finally we will cover business travel. So in terms of business travel, visa-free travel will apply for a 90-day stay in any 180 days. Passports. check your validity. And sorry, under visa-free travel, that's applicable for 20 Schengen countries. Passports. The general advice is for passports, do not, if your passport has less than 6 months to expiry, you should renew it. If you are driving in the EU, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, you need to check if an international driving permit is required. And finally, for green cards, check with your motor insurance company as to whether that's required. Next slide, please. Finally, EU temporary leave to remain. If you need to leave, if the UK leaves, leaves the EU, it is establishing a new temporary leave to remain scheme, which will allow EU nationals to work in the UK after the UK leaves. And upon granting of temporary leave to remain, an EU national can work in the UK for 36 months. And they can still apply to the settlement scheme, the EU settlement scheme we referred to, up to the 31st of December 2020. So that's an important initiative as well. Next slide, please. So now at this stage, I would like to hand and pass over to Norma Foster and Claire Snowden from ICANN Global. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So 80% of all new business across the globe comes from word-of-mouth referrals and recommendations. So building trusted relations with prospects and clients overseas is key to winning and retaining new business. And even the most amicable divorce proceedings can be fraught at the best of times, and Brexit is definitely no exception to this rule. With all the financial, political, logistical, emotional upheavals that we're going through, our customers and prospects in Europe may well be less inclined to trade with us in the future, both because of increased costs and bureaucracy, and in some cases for those emotional reasons. There's plenty of resentment towards Britain for leaving. A key step in helping to overcome that current resentment and the uncertainty and hassle involved with trading across new borders will be to communicate more effectively to keep existing and win new business. We definitely need to work harder on the communication marketing front over the coming months and years to maintain our strong position. And that means that we need to take greater account of foreign languages, adapt our approach to suit different cultures, and certainly make our web strategy more globally oriented and modify our products and services to suit the needs of each of our international customers. On the next slide, you will be able to see our top 5 tips for trading internationally in the face of Brexit that will serve to keep you visible, trustworthy, and an attractive proposition to your clients and prospects. And Claire and I would like to talk you through these top 5 tips now that are also included in our workbook, and there's a workbook for each of the presentations available for you as handouts, where we've actually included within the workbook an extra 5 tips as a bonus. So your website and online resources sit at the heart of your international communications and business development activities to give you maximum visibility and reach across the globe. Indeed, the website's purpose is to create the experience of a personal meeting with yourself, where you can start that process of building trusted relations with your audience. And there are 2 key audiences that you will need to consider. Firstly, real flesh and blood people that will visit your website and hopefully engage with you and buy from you. And secondly, international search engines that will evaluate your online offer and, using over 240 criteria, will determine where your website will appear in their search results. And if you're not on page 1, you're going to be losing around 90% of your audience. On our next slide, this captures, thank you, this captures the first tip for you. People do business next with people that they trust. And there are many things that put people off when they first look at a website. Slow to load, spelling mistakes, a lack of a clear call to action, it's too difficult to find out how your website works, out of date content, poor images, all these things actually have a negative impact and will erode that trust. On the next slide, and if you could click again, please. You will see here a diagram, and the left axis shows you the extent to which either customer believe you are competent and capable. Are you the go-to expert in your field, someone who really knows their stuff and can provide me with top quality products or services? And on the web, you would be producing quality, relevant, up-to-date, authoritative content, preferably even unique content that's attractive to your clients and search engines online, and that will work particularly hard for you, increasing traffic and leads. And this builds respect. Along the bottom axis is the extent to which I, the customer, believe that you care about me. If I were to get in touch with you from overseas, how well will you look after me? Will it be a great experience? Do you care about me and put my interests as a customer first? How good is your customer service? So you need to spell this out quite explicitly. Review your content and be sure to put the customer first and yourself second. This brings affection, loyalty, and ultimately respect, and affection will lead to trust, increasing the performance of your website and communications online, and indeed offline for that matter. So that was our first tip. Claire will now talk you through the second tip.
Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So you need to put yourself in your customer's shoes. As was so aptly stated by Zig Ziglar, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them. So putting yourself in your customer's shoes, are you doing that? Are you showing how much you care about them? And are you speaking their language literally? To put this in context, out of the world's 7.5 billion inhabitants, only 1.5 billion speak English. That's 20% of the Earth's population. However, most of the people that speak English aren't native English speakers. Only about 360 million actually speak English as their first language. So your customers want to know how much you understand and care about them. And when marketing online, we need to take into account both the people and the search engines. Did you know for a fact that having your website in local language has shown to increase sales by 400%? Next slide. Next slide, please. If you and your business are the camera in this picture on the slide, and the bird is you, the customer that is looking in at your business, what do they see? Are you speaking their language? For example, using the right keywords and phrases? Are you holding their attention? As mentioned by Norma, have you had a look at your website recently? Does it talk to your customer? Have you looked to see and checked about things like broken links, content, slow loading? Research shows that we now have less than 1.7 seconds to capture our visitors' attention before they leave a relevant website. And when they come to our website, they normally will have two key questions that they want to be answered for them to be able to stay, feel that you are talking to them as a potential customer, and for them to follow an action online. The first, is this page relevant? Have you got what I want? The second, do I trust this website? So look at your website from your customer's viewpoint. What do they see? Have you got local content and testimonials and information that talks in the language of your potential client? Over to Norma. Over to Norma.
Next slide, please. So our third tip is clear. You must give the impression of a successful international business that can trade across borders in your target markets with ease and dexterity, and build confidence with your customers. And that message must be explicit in your communications. clearly stating your global offer and how your international sales process works and how you will look after your international clients. However, we all like buying from the business close to us or in our region. The UK and Germany, for example, you may be aware, are proud of the buy local and position this prominently in communications. Google also knows that this is the case. So by localizing your content, using local languages, a local office address, telephone number, and perhaps even an email address such as germany@mycompany.com, with local images, videos, relevant testimonials, which can raise confidence to buy by between 64 and 92%, so really valuable, and local content, you can make yourself more attractive to locals and thus more competitive and much more likely to perform well in the local version of Google, in this case google.de. So it's important to use a .com or another generic top-level domain if you want search to perform well for you in international markets, as a .co.uk is targeted to work well for you only in the UK. And just a secondary tip here, if you do own a .eu domain name, you will need to prove that you have a local business in Europe somewhere to be able to retain that. And you can find more information on 101domain.com. So there is also a three-step approach to developing your international website. Step one, fairly obvious, get your UK website right first. Internationalize your offer. Clearly state that you trade with customers overseas and how it works in global English, using as many visuals as possible and reducing the content on the basis of a picture speaks 1,000 words, and make it easier for your clients to engage with your content. So that would be the second step. The third step is then introduce country or language pages, perhaps just one page initially that you can then expand into a dedicated website for that country or region if there's a good business case for you doing so at a later stage. So on the next slide, I just wanted to provide you with one example of Tetley, who really showcase how the presentation of these different country pages or different websites might look. And they've stayed on brand with their cuppa, with the flag for each of the respective countries that they are targeting attached to that particular cup. And our advice is only use flags with countries, not if you are targeting languages, where flags can become a difficult emotive topic. So we'd now like to do a poll to understand where your main business development challenges are. And the key question are, what are your main challenges around international business development in the face of Brexit? And we'd like you to tick all that apply. So clients, not enough time or resources to do your business, or even Brexit is having an impact on clients' willingness to do business with you. So have a reflection on these and tick all that might apply for you. I'm looking forward, Claire, very much to seeing exactly what might come out of the poll here.
Absolutely.
Just giving it a few seconds so everyone gets a chance to vote.
Excellent. I'm sure they're thinking about it hard and getting ready to click.
Lots to think about.
I'll do a little countdown. So I'll close it in 5 or so seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then I'll share the results.
Oh gosh, that is interesting, isn't it? Generating more work from existing clients, definitely top of the league. And very interesting, Brexit is having an impact on clients' willingness to do business with them, which we feel very strongly, particularly feedback from our customers, that this is indeed the case. So glad to see that that's proven in this particular webinar and the need for us to work harder. Claire, any comments from you?
Absolutely. The willingness to do business and generating more work from existing clients, clearly helping us to understand that we need to perhaps do more work in engaging and communicating more effectively as we move forward through the transition of Brexit.
Yeah. So Claire, let me hand over to you then to talk us through the next tips on the slides.
Thank you. So next slide, please. So this tip 4. Are you easy to find, easy to contact, and easy to do business with? Can your clients and potential clients find you? Are you visible? In the following slides is an example. This is now a slide that is no longer alive, of a client website. Now, from this image, I'm sure you will think that this is a large company with many employees working globally with a large global reach. In fact, this company was run by just one person. They wanted to project that they were a global company and engage with prospective new clients overseas. This current slide shows how this company created a global landing page and initially set up Skype numbers in all the different global locations to be able to receive and take calls. This individual clearly was so inundated with calls from overseas potential contacts that his wife threatened to divorce him, and he then had to set up and think of another alternative. So he set up virtual offices in country where the calls were answered in the local language, and he then was sent a translated email so that he could follow up with the inquiry within 48 hours. A really innovative way and a good example of how we can use technology to enable us when we work internationally to increase our reach and be able to communicate more effectively with potential clients. In this particular case, this client company saw an increase in turnover in a matter of months of over 160%. So a true case for making sure that you are communicating internationally and making it easy for your customers to contact you, find you, and do business with you. Next slide, please. So on the next slide, I'd like to show you some examples of some LinkedIn profiles. Did you know that LinkedIn has over 630 million users? So in addition to your website, you have got LinkedIn to engage and communicate with potential clients and customers. Have you got a LinkedIn profile? Does it let your visitor know what you can do for them? In these examples, we can see fully optimized LinkedIn profiles that clearly show what these individuals are how they're supporting their potential clients, and they are certainly letting the people that visit their LinkedIn profiles know what they do and how to connect with them. Did you know that you can also now create local language pages on LinkedIn? There are currently 24 languages available, and as one of the most optimized platforms currently ranking that comes above many websites, it now is a time more than ever for you to have a fully optimized LinkedIn profile. Do you have a LinkedIn profile? Have you had a look, and does it talk to your clients and customers? Next slide, please. So on the next slides, we'd like to simply bring some of the advice that we've shared in our top 5 tips together and show you examples of what other companies have done with their websites in the past that demonstrates some of these top 5 tips. So in the case of Nigel Wright, who broke into the European market, he took a simplified approach to adapting his website for each market by using the same template and just replacing the content for each local version. Here we see the UK version with the local telephone number and a British flag in the wing of the mirror of the car. Next slide, please. Here is the German version with a local telephone number for Germany and the German flag in the wing mirror. And in the next slide, the French version with the Eiffel Tower. The following slide shows the Belgian version, where you can see luscious Belgian chocolates in the canals, and second navigation button has been added for the 2 languages, one in Flemish and one for French, to respect the local culture and language preferences. Next slide. Back to Tetley. Here you can see their Polish website that sits on a local Polish domain and has been culturally adapted to suit the local audience. And in the next slide, their USA website sits on a tailored generic top-level domain, tetleyusa.com. However, they have included USA in the name to be more attractive to their local audience and also to position it more for the US market in the search engines. Now, in the following slides, HSBC has dedicated websites for each of their countries that they target, which have been tailored specifically to their different cultures from a design perspective. You must have a good business case with a good prospect of ROI to be able to do this, but on this slide you will see their UK offer. And on the next slide, their Australian site, sun and snorkeling. Wouldn't we love to be there, particularly today with the cold weather? And the next slide, Germany, very logical and business-like. The next slide for China, red and very business in comparison, and busy in comparison. And in the UAE, here in English, did you know only 19% speak Arabic? But in the next slide, here is the Arabic slide for the local population that hold the ultimate decision-making power and budgets. So it's important to include Arabic if you are targeting MENA regions. And as you can see, the template reads from right to left. Over to Norma.
So, drawing to a close now, our final tip number 5 for you is to give yourself the gift of sufficient time, preferably a month, if appropriate, to properly plan out your international communications and business development activities and the work that you need to do on your communications resources and website to support this. And on the, if you click, preparation takes a lot of time and effort. And then finally, click again, implementation and measurement is going to be so much easier if you get that prep work done. And then finally, on this last slide, just remember that we'll be making the workbooks with lots of resources and tips and 5 extra bonus tips available to you to download as a handout. And here are the final 5 tips on our final slide, just as a reminder, to help you boost your efforts to win new business through this Brexit process and beyond. So please do connect with us on LinkedIn. Claire and I wish you all the best with your Brexit business development planning. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Norma. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Kevin, for the presentations and advice there. I hope that's been useful to everyone. We've got a bit of time to answer a few questions, so remember you can ask questions at any point using the question box on the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen. The first question I'll put forward, though, is just around tariffs. So I guess this will be for Kevin initially. Kevin, where's the best place to go to find information about tariffs?
So there are a couple of sites. There is the excuse me, gov.uk trade tariff site. Equally, there's the WTO, the World Trade Organization site, which there was a link on the slide, but also the workbooks provide probably a better place to look. So you have the web link on there, but you also have some screenshots in terms of how you can filter it by country and filter it by product commodity code. So either the gov.uk site or the WTO site are the best places. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Everyone's been a bit shy today, but we've got another questions come through. So it's for someone who's taking goods to an event. And they've asked, what do I need to do to take goods to an event to sell and then bring back into the UK? I guess that'd be Kevin again first, would it? Kevin?
Yeah, so again, that's a good question. Thank you very much for asking it. So goods taken to events such as an exhibition can be included as what's called temporary exports. So currently, if there are 78 countries in what's called a carnet system, in which you require an ATA carnet if you're taking goods to an exhibition, where you do not pay tariffs as long as you bring the goods back in this case to United Kingdom. Now, currently for exhibitions in the European Union, the carnet system does not need to apply. If the UK leaves in a no deal, or if it leaves after a deal, after a transition period, carnets will be required, and they are obtained from accredited chambers of commerce. So a good question, and a very important point of the requirement for carnets. If, however, you're selling goods at the exhibition and are obtaining money for those goods, you will require to declare them as a customs value, and there will be tariffs applicable. Thank you.
Excellent, a great question and a great answer. We've had one come in from Jennifer, who's asked, as a small business, our resources are limited, but what would be the most valuable action to implement in order to have the biggest impact on our international sales? So I guess that one's for Norma and Claire. I don't know who wants to start on that. Norma?
Yes, I think, you know, your a quick hit, quick win, if you're doing business to business, which I'm assuming is part of your model, Jennifer, would be to look at your LinkedIn profile and get that looking great so that you're making a fantastic first impression. And you can upload actually quite a lot of resources to that. You can create a company page and add resources to that and really start targeting, connecting with and having discussions with customers. It is well optimized, as Claire mentioned, so it will perform well for you in search engines and give you a lot of visibility. But on the basis of people do business with people that they trust, I just think that's a lovely way to target through to the prospects and customers that are really important to you and start building those relationships. And I think that's a great quick hit, quick win to help your business development efforts.
And just to add to that, of course, that you want to make it easy to be found, to contact and to do business with. So your LinkedIn profile can certainly do that job for you. I would also mention that your online presence in general, just make sure that any messages and information that you have online is the information that you want to be sharing with potential customers and clients. Have a look at your, do a Google search on your company and have a look at how you're projecting.
Great, thank you both. I'll leave the floor open for a couple more minutes for a couple more questions. Please feel free to ask anything. Another one for Kevin. Where can I find out about updated CE marking information?
Okay, so there's a few sites that you can look at there. With regard to the CE marking, there is a government notice, a gov.uk notice. There's two notices. One is placing manufactured goods in the UK market, and another is placing manufactured goods on the EU market. So do look at those, but basically the requirements is that there will be a requirement for a new UK CA mark that will replace the EU CE mark. And companies will need to register at the appropriate time in a no-deal Brexit or at the end of a transition period or possibly before for a UK CA mark. And your European suppliers will also have to meet the requirements of the UK CA mark as well, which will be similar to the EU CE mark. Also, for businesses have to take steps to continue to use the CE mark in Europe. So if you are self-certifying currently from your UK address, you will no longer be able to self-certify in the event of a no-deal Brexit, but also probably at the end of a transition period as well, or even sometime in between those dates. Do look at that, because you will need to, if you have a notifying body in the UK that's certified, you will need to check that that notifying body has an EU legal entity that they can notify from the EU. So there's a positive action there. If you're self-certifying, you will either have to certify from an address in the European Union, or you will need to use a notifying body, or your customer will need to certify. So some positive and urgent actions needed there as we move forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we'll do one last question. This one again would be for Norma and Claire. Also, you spoke a bit about LinkedIn, but kind of what are there any international equivalents to LinkedIn in certain markets which businesses operating in those markets need to be aware of, say, for example, Russia or for China?
Yes, indeed there are, and we were looking at alternatives at the London event yesterday on this. There's things like vContactor and different resources. However, LinkedIn has over 630 million people, 68% plus of them are key decision makers and budget holders. So we still do actually propose that LinkedIn is the first place for you to start. However, if you are making a concerted and targeted effort at a particular country, then looking at the likes of My or vContactor and other platforms that work well in that particular marketplace is a really good part of your initial strategy. And they're quite easy to research simply by doing Google searches. Thank you.
Yes, and in addition to doing that research, also to look at the platforms that your potential customers are using, and to understand where they're hanging out, so to speak. So if you were focusing on somewhere like China, for example, WeChat is showing some really good numbers now for companies that are in e-commerce, selling products to the Chinese market. So to Norma's point, I think it's all about the research. And the good news is that a lot of this information can be found readily available through doing an online search.
Excellent, thank you, Norma and Claire. And I think on that note, we'll wrap up, I think. So thank you once again to Norma, Claire and Kevin for the presentation and answers. Thank you. Right, so next slide, please. Before we go, I'd like to let you know about what we've got coming up at the Institute of Export and International Trade. Despite the current flex extension, we are continuing to run several Brexit-related training courses, many of which are fundable by government grants. So please do look at these. They help you gain key export skills like completing customs declarations. And yeah, you can find information about that on the training part of our website. And we also have our last World Trade Summit of the year coming up on November 28th. This is a great chance to hear from global trade experts and to network with fellow exporters in the region. You can find details about all of our training courses, our events, membership offerings and education programme at export.org.uk. Next, please. For those of you who are familiar with the Institute's regular Open to Export webinar programme, our next webinar will be looking at how exporters can reach international customers online through Amazon. That's taking place on November 14th, and you can find details about how to sign up to that at opentoexport.com/webinars. Next, please. Finally, through Open to Export, we're also currently running an Export Action Plan competition with Bibby Financial Services this autumn. This is a great opportunity for SMEs to win £3,000 towards their export plans. The deadline to enter is November 5th, which is Tuesday, and that's ahead of a showcase final, which has actually taken place at the aforementioned Birmingham World Trade Summit on November 28th. You can find details about this at opentoexport.com. But that's all for us today. We hope you found that useful. And if you have any concerns or questions about Brexit, please get in touch with any of us. And yeah, best of luck with everything. Goodbye.